Good night, everyone. This is Koku. Um, Hopping on real quick to give you guys an idea what's going on tonight. Also, I want to check if the sound is right. I used this setup last week, and I actually forgot um, how I set it up on my phone and this computer that I'm using. Um, I just want to know if it sounds right, but of course, no one's here yet to let me know how it sounds. Shout out to Bobby Wright. I just want to know if it sounds right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Shout out to Bobby Wright. I haven't seen Bobby Wright in a minute. Hope all is well with him. Shout out to Rico Cooper. I see Arthur is here. Sam Buyaka Buyaka. Appreciate you for coming through. So I guess the sound is good. So we're gonna be talking about African socialism, and we're gonna be reading from Tom Mboya, one of my favorite writers. You'll notice a lot of times when you're reading about traditional African history and stuff, Mboya comes up often. So I think this might be a good read. It shouldn't be too long of a read. So you guys stay tuned. On the other side, we will come back after we do the intro. We'll come back and we'll start the reading of this paper.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Just want to remind you guys before we get the show rolling that this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows on the network you are invited to tune into.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. We have Arthur in the chat. Make sure you guys are checking out his music. Subscribe to his channel. And also check out his social media as well, Twitter, Instagram, etc. Gas Him Up is here. My boy Gas Him Up, who has been lacing us with knowledge on the Shoot the Breeze segment of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. He's also here. Gas Him Up says, I would love to hear this podcast. I sent you the link on Nkrumah and his book on neo-colonialism. Okay, I haven't seen that email yet, or maybe it's on Discord. I'm not sure, but I'll definitely check it out. Officer says, give thanks to you for your efforts. It's so easy to take so many things for granted. So much work goes into every production and every outreach. I'm happy to have this space to go to tonight. I appreciate that. And that's what I would encourage all of you who like the shows on KWAZ Radio. reach out to the host sometimes and just say, hey, man, I appreciate what you do. Please keep it coming. You know, we'll support, et cetera, et cetera. So shout out to Officer. Shout out to Gas Them Up, who says that it was an email he sent me. Okay, I didn't see the email yet. I'll check it out as well. So yeah, we're talking about this Tom Mboya paper on African socialism, where socialism is a socioeconomic and political system where the workers own the general means of production. So the workers own the farms, they own the factories, they own the tools, and they even own the raw materials. The idea is that you decentralize and you direct worker ownership, right? You decentralize. So you control the direct worker ownership or state ownership of the means of production. We got Marcus McGee here. He's saying, I appreciate you guys too. I appreciate all of you guys who are here tonight, man. On a Tuesday night hanging out with me. I appreciate that. Right? So that's socialism in a nutshell. African socialism, or some people call it Afro-socialism, is a belief in sharing economic resources in a traditional African way, as distinct from classical socialism or doctrinaire socialism. That's an interesting distinction, because what is that African way? I imagine they're referring to Ubuntu. You know, I am because you are type thing. So we'll read this paper and see what Mboya has to say about it. I want to say I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Please hit the like button. Let's get the likes up on the video, right? This software I'm using is telling me there's 0 views, but I see you guys in the chat talking to me. So it's the game that they play. All right, so let's get into it. The word socialism is so much in current use that it is worth pausing a little while to inquire what this popular word means. Here in Africa, we have states and statesmen wedded to the idea of quote unquote African socialism as the goals of the economic and social policies of their governments. President Nkrumah of Ghana has declared that the establishment of African socialism is the target of his government. Over in Asia, the ruling Indian Congress is pledged to establish a quote unquote socialistic pattern of society in India. What is socialism and what is African socialism? And what does it mean to us in terms of our short and long-term objectives in economics and politics? Before answering these questions, I would like to take a short detour and examine the basic facts about the current African political situation. I am doing this because I am convinced that only by putting it in its temporal context will it be possible for us to understand fully the nature and significance of this term, quote unquote, African socialism. Today, Africa is experiencing a critical social, political, and economic transition. We are emerging from colonial rule to political independence. We are immersed in a massive transition in which we are seeking new identities at personal, national, and international levels. Africans are struggling to build new societies and a new Africa, and we need a new political philosophy, a philosophy of our own that will explain, validify, and help to cement our experience. See, that's the part that always throws me when I read different works on like African socialism. I mean, you know, it's a construct of others that you're trying to make yours. You're trying to fit it into your thing. And I have an issue with that. Oh, I see we got the pro-black perspective here saying, oh, cool, a Tom Mboya paper. I don't know if that's sarcasm or whatever. Arthur earlier said there's a danger in calling these things socialism. It alienates those who don't want to identify with the European idea of socialism. Same with communism. And I agree with what Arthur said 100%. There is that danger that Arthur, defined right there, right? A lot of people hear it and immediately turn away from it. And again, like I was trying to say a second ago, with some good reason, in a sense. If you hear another European solution for an African problem, yeah, that will turn you off if you have some understanding of what's going on. You know, you got to find, Mboya says here, Africans are struggling to build new societies and a new Africa, and we need a new political philosophy, a philosophy of our own. I think that's super important. I think that's super important. To continue, um, in and around the world today, there are millions of people in hundreds of nations engaged in a similar venture. The aims they have in view are not very different from our own, but we differ in tradition and background. Their position and perspective vis-a-vis the challenge to be faced is not the same as we have. We are thus cast for our own role, and we either live up to it or not. So Gas him up asks a question. So he says socialism, from my research, does have its origins in Europe? Question mark. Is that a question or a statement? Right. Yeah. So we have already made very positive beginnings for in the concept of Pan-Africanism, with its insistence on African brotherhood, non-alignment vis-a-vis ideological power blocks, the African personality, democracy, etc. We have a set of values and beliefs which give meaning and direction to our political demands and objectives. You all know that Pan-Africanism is a movement based on our common experience under the yoke of colonialism and is fostered by a sense of common destiny and a sense of traditional brotherhood. Right there is probably as good as you get in terms of um, of why Pan Africanism, right? I think it's W.E.B from the Harsh Ready podcast who talks about, well, it has to be more than skin color, and I agree with that. And I agree with Mboya here that it has to be about the fact of our history, not just our skin colors, but our history under this common enemy that we have. And it has to be under what we want for ourselves in the future, right? Collectively, right? Gassom up says, yes, question. Socialism is a French thing, if I'm not mistaken. You guys back me up if I'm off key, if I'm off base here, but socialism to me is a French thing. I strongly believe that in the field of economic relations, we can similarly be guided by the traditional presence of socialist ideas and attitudes in the African mental makeup. When I talk of socialist attitudes, those of us who were grown up under the intellectual climate of the Western world will no doubt be thinking of socialism of the Western type. So I think Gassamut might be referring to Ujamaa or Ubuntu or African communalism or something. Maybe that's what he's talking about. But the doctrinaire socialism is a European thing. When I talk of socialist attitudes, those of us who have grown up under the intellectual climate of the Western world will no doubt be thinking of socialism of the Western type. There are, of course, others who will be thinking in terms of a Marxian brand of socialism. As a matter of fact, there is such a tragic orgy of confusion in parts of this continent over this and other concepts that I do wish our people would sit back and think for themselves a bit. We have Africans who call themselves socialists, quote unquote African socialists. But if you scrutinize their thought processes, you discover that they are so blindly steeped in foreign thought mechanics, and in their actions, they adopt standards which do great violence to the concept of African brotherhood. These so called quote unquote socialists peddle and parrot foreign slogans and allow themselves to be swept away by emotions which have nothing to do with the noble aspirations of our people. It appears to me that although Africa is getting rid of Western colonialism and is still fighting against its hangover, known as neocolonialism, there is yet another fight to be waged, the fight against intellectual imperialism. This fight must be waged now, side by side with the fight for economic independence. It is because of this stark reality that I value the concept of quote unquote African socialism so much. When I talk of African socialism, I refer to those proven codes of conduct in the African societies which have, over the ages, conferred dignity on our people and afforded them security regardless of their station in life. I refer to universal charity, which characterize our societies, and I refer to the African thought processes and cosmological ideas which regard man not as a social means, but as an end and an entity in the society. I like that right in there. Gaston Up says, "No, sir. I'm simply saying the parameters of socialism originate within that French-German nexus, as you point out." Oh, okay. Well, I think it's the question marks that threw me off, Gaston Up. So please pardon my misunderstanding. So this brings us to a section called the organic tradition. I'm really curious to read this part here. It might be argued from what I have just said, that African socialism stands in a class by itself. This is not true. The basic tenets of socialism are universal, and we are either socialists by these basic principles or not at all. I have said earlier that socialism is a mental conditioning or an attitude of mind established in order to achieve rational relationship and harmony in the society. In the Western socialist tradition, this mental attitude has taken roots from the thoughts and experiences of the people dating back to ancient times. It began with Aristotle's dictum that man is a social or political animal, which has no potency and no life outside the society. From this dictum has risen a host of economic, social, and political thoughts. For example, because man is a social animal, his economic plight and destiny is bound up with functions of the society in which he lives. Let me read that again. For example, because man is a social animal, his economic plight and destiny is bound up with the functions of the society in which he lives. Okay. Therefore, every member of a society has certain obligations to the society in which he finds himself. And conversely, every society has certain responsibilities towards its members. Also, it occurred to those people that the society is an organic thing, with individuals playing the role of cells in the organism. This is common fare when they discuss this stuff, to liken it to a living organism, or a cell, I should say. Also, it occurred to those people that society is an organic thing with individuals playing the role of cells in the organism. From this premise, the interdependence of members of the society has been inferred. Thus, in the society, the rich are rich mainly because the society has made it possible. Similarly, the poor are poor mainly because the society has made it possible. Do you guys agree with that? Do you agree with this statement right here? Thus, in society, the rich are rich mainly because the society has made it possible. Similarly, the poor are poor mainly because the society has made it possible. You guys let me know what you think. Therefore, if in any society, a group of individuals control the land, capital, skills, and other means by which members of society make a living, and if they use these means to achieve selfish ends, then an abnormal situation develops in the social organism. The society, being an organic thing, if any groups own and control the means by which the others live, the latter literally become slaves. For he owns me who owns the means by which I live. Furthermore, by constitution, the society is organic and no member of it is independent enough to stand on his own. As a matter of fact, no man is good enough to be another man's matter. Therefore, the best and the most rational way of running a society is to do so in such a way that there is equality of sacrifice in all walks of life, and in such a way as to give each according to his needs and take from each according to his ability. This is why, in the general concept, socialism stands for equality of opportunity, security of income, and employment, equality before the law, the rule of law, individual freedom, universal franchise, state regulation of economic life, state control of vital means of production and distribution, etc. Gas them up in the chat says the matrix makes reference to this. The machines, us, our bodies as a source of energy. We are cellularized. A cell is a prison and also a battery cell. He goes on to say, yes, rich and poor are creations of the state. Ancient cultures created the potlatch to rid one man of having such excesses. The potlatch. Okay. Thanks for that. Thanks for that insight. I appreciate it. This brings us to a section called Soils of the Sun. But before I get that, I just want to ask you guys something. In the previous paragraph, they say, therefore, the best and most rational way of running society is to do so in such a way that there is equality of sacrifice in all walks of life, and in such a way as to give each according to his needs and to take from each according to his ability. My question to you guys, and you guys have heard me talk about this on Shoot the Breeze and other episodes of the show. My question is, what do you do with that framework in mind? What do you do with the highly motivated, the folks who, the folks who have greater output than others? What do you do with them in such a society? You guys give me your comments. I'd like to hear what you guys think. So this brings us to Sons of the Soil, a section of the paper. In the African tradition, we find an attitude of mind which very closely approximates these which I have just mentioned, though they spring from a different stimulation and promise. In Africa, the belief that we are all sons and daughters of the soil has exercised tremendous influence on our social, economic, and political relationships. Arising from this belief is the logic and practice of equality because, quote, we are sons and daughters of the soil, end of quote. Also arising from the same belief is the practice of communal ownership of the vital means of life, the land. The whole became the symbol of work. Every able-bodied male and female worked. Who was it? Was it Gassam Up who was saying this, or Jay was saying this on Shoot the Breeze not too long ago? Showing us that in traditional Africa, every man and woman worked. It wasn't this stay-at-home stuff that we tend to espouse today, right? The whole became the symbol of work. Every able-bodied male and female worked. Laziness was not tolerated, and there were appropriate social sanctions and ethics to encourage hard work and industriousness. We got Akanfo here, Akanfo Yawu. Brother's been checking out some past episodes of the podcast. Greetings to you, brother. Right? Gassam Up says they created the potlatch for such. Also, the concept of motivation is largely based on orientation. Ancient medieval serfs did not aspire to be like Bill Gates. That's true. That's true. That is true. But I think we're getting to something here real quick. Laziness was not tolerated, and there were appropriate social sanctions and ethics to encourage hard work and industriousness. Poverty existed, but it was not due to man exploiting man. The social, cultural, and economic gap between the rich and the poor was not great, partly because wealth per se did not confer such social and political power on the wealthy people as it does under Western society, and because the operation of kinship helped to spread out the income of the wealthy. There was equality of opportunity. Everyone had land and hoe at the start of life. Hoe being a tool, by the way. The acquisitive instinct, which is largely responsible for the vicious excesses and exploitation under the capitalist system, was tempered by a sense of togetherness and rejection of graft and meanness. When I think of African socialism, I also have in mind those ideals and attitudes of mind in our tradition which have regulated the conduct of our people with the social weal as the objective. I think it is worthwhile emphasizing the fact that these ideals and attitudes are indigenous and that they spring from the basic experience of our people here in Africa and even here in Kenya. It was not difficult to learn and practice them because they were expressed in the language of the soil, which our people understood and not in foreign slogans. They represented an honest attempt to do and practice what was in the best interests of the Africa. Interesting. If you guys are enjoying what you're hearing so far from the paper, drop a 1 for me in the chat. Drop a 1 for me in the chat if you're enjoying it. Gassum Up says, and by the way, I appreciate you, Gassum Up, for all your comments. Gassum Up says the European claims to be Christian, but practice usury. The allowance of usury allowed banking families to arise, etc. Yep. Gassum Up says, yes, everyone had land. This also exposes the myth of prostitution being the oldest profession. What woman would be a hoe when she could farm or fish, etc.? Yeah, I think that myth is a European. I think that's a European tale. I think that their women, the oldest profession that their women had was prostitution. What is the book again I read many years ago that outlined just how dastardly these Europeans were to their women, man? And me and the Pro-Black Perspective, when we first had an interview together, we talked about that too. These guys, yeah. I digress. But yeah, like I was saying, to gas them up, thank you for all the commentary that's going on from you as well. I appreciate it. So what then is the significance of these attitudes vis-a-vis our aims in the economic and political fields in Kenya? So this brings us to a section of the paper that deals with the Kenya destiny. If you guys don't mind, this is a very short paper. We only have like a page more to read. I want to do a station ID break here. And on the other side, we'll read about the Kenya destiny. So you guys stay tuned for me, please.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? Shout out to the revolutionary matron. To you guys, reach out to the matron. Let the matron know you miss hearing her voice and her insight as well. Make sure you guys check out the last episode of the Pro-Black Perspective. It was a good discussion as well. I saw a few folks from here over there, like Mr. Untouchable, KW Don 7. So that's always good to see that you guys are checking out the other content as well. I want to ask this question. We just read that section of the paper a second ago, Sons of the Soil, that gave us an insight into what the continent looked like originally. Like we talked about land and how everyone had land, how the men and the women worked, everyone had the tools of labor, etc. Can we get back to that? Can we get back to that? What will it take? Right? We just read about how everyone committed to the program, essentially. Everyone, there was no laziness, and they had means by which to prevent a lazy man from just hanging around, right? Can we get back to that, though? And what will it take to get back to that, right? What will it take to get back to that? So you guys answer that for me, and I'll read your responses after I see them. So the Kenya destiny. In Kenya, as in the other East African countries, we are committed to one economic destiny based on an East African common market, harmonized financial, fiscal, and social policies, etc. The objective of the common approach of the policies themselves being the achievement and maintenance of the highest possible rate of increase in the standard of living of all our people, the creation of the necessary conditions to this end, and the enhancement of freedom and maintenance of order. I would like to submit that without basic loyalty to Kenya and East Africa, the achievement of these objectives can be an impossible proposition. In this respect, I would like to point out that the positive attitudes I have just mentioned provide the best mental and human framework in relation to these aims. If we have accepted the challenge of development, it would be a contradiction if we adopted conflicting attitudes. Under the guidance of our socialist tradition, I would like to see the Kenya of today transform itself along the following lines. Before I read those following lines, let me reread that paragraph. I see Jonelle has joined us. Jonelle is a regular viewer of Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze. Always a pleasure to see when folks come through during the week as well. Gassed them up answered my question. So you guys, if you guys have thoughts on that question, especially after seeing what Gassed them up says, I'd like to hear from you guys as well. He said, Gassed them up says, almost impossible. We have to remove the Western incursions on our social programming. So that to me means we have to develop an education, right? We have to develop an education for this mindset. Do you agree with that or disagree with that? But I appreciate that response. Let me just read this section again. I think I like how Mboya states this. So I want to stress it again. He says, in Kenya, as in the other East African countries, we are committed to one economic destiny based on an East African common market. Now, you guys might not remember, but Oni and I, from the Pro-Black Perspective, had a discussion about this federated East Africa. You guys should go back in the archives and check that out. And you know, we talked about Nkrumah's part and kind of destroying that effort, right? You guys go back and check that out. But in Kenya, as in the other Eastern African countries, we are committed to one economic destiny based on an East African common market, harmonized financial, fiscal, and social policies, etc. The objective of the common approach of the policies themselves being the achievement and maintenance of the highest possible rate of increase in the standard of living of all our people, the creation of the necessary conditions to this end, and the enhancement of freedom and maintenance of order. Again, I have a question, and I know you guys might be sick of all the questions, but is this the aim, you know, that one aim, one destiny? Should our one aim, one destiny be along the lines of the Kenya destiny that Mboya speaks of right now? I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on that as well. Right? In this respect, I would like to point out that the positive attitudes I have just mentioned provide the best mental and human framework in relation to these aims. If we have accepted the challenge of development, it would be a contradiction if we adopted conflicting attitudes. I agree with that. And I think Akonfo might be talking about that now too. Akonfo in the chat says, in my opinion, we must use thought, speech, and action to end racial white supremacy and bring a system of justice worldwide, maybe using Pan-Africanism. Let me read that again. Akonfo says, in my opinion, we must use thought, speech, and action. I like it, especially the action part, to end racism, white supremacy, and bring a system of justice worldwide, maybe using Pan-Africanism. So we have a brother here who's not afraid of Pan-Africanism. Gas him up says yes. Right? This notion right here, the Kenya destiny, gas him up feels we should share that idea of a one destiny. Does anyone else feel that way? Just let me know in the chat. Akonfo, you're talking about thought, speech, and action, and maybe I'm tunnel vision, but for me, education is what will likely get you that one thought, speech, and action to end the system of domination that we're under. People talk about a code all the time. Codes are, like a code by itself without a code being intertwined in terms of education, even spirituality, culture, how you go about your economics. Your code has to be intertwined. And I personally think, again, I might be tunnel vision to this thinking. I personally think that it's an education that you have to build up in our people over time. But I digress. I want to thank all you guys for all the comments too. Under the guidance of our socialist tradition, I would like to see the Kenya of today transform itself along the following lines. Since over 3/4 of Kenya's population depends on agriculture, and since agriculture is the largest single contributor to Kenya's gross domestic product, GDP, the expansion and modernization of agriculture and relative production must be given priority with 3 aims in view. First, to expand the employment base and possibly more food for the country's population. Second, to diversify our export crops and expand their production to enable the country to earn more foreign exchange, as it is these earnings which will determine, to a large extent, the volume of imports which can be made available for economic development in other sectors. Third, to accelerate rural development. Fourth, to lay the foundation for industrialization by expanding the domestic market through processing for export most of the primary products which we now export in the raw state, and through manufacturing for the East African market. So I think the thing to keep in mind here is when he talks about import-export, he's talking about within the East African market, right? Within that federated area that they were trying to get done. He's not talking about in the world stage where you're dealing with this Eurasian enemy still and trying to trade with them. At least I'm pretty sure he's talking about inter-African, East African trade. Up to now, Kenya's agriculture has depended mainly on European settler capital, skill, and enterprise based on unequitable land tenure. We must rapidly move away from this type of development. Our current experience shows that this concentration on European agriculture and on the few Asian-owned plantations, together with the concentration of primary industries in Nairobi and in the settled areas, are responsible for the serious problems we are facing today. Let me read that again. Up to now, Kenya's agriculture has depended mainly on European settler capital. Check. Skill and enterprise based on unequitable land tenure. Okay, got it. We must rapidly move away from this type of development. Agreed. Our current experience shows that this concentration on European agriculture and on the few Asian-owned plantations, together with the concentration of primary industries in Nairobi and in the settled areas, are responsible for the serious problems we are facing today. Today, Kenya is facing balance of payment difficulties. The employment structure of our country is unequal and unstable. Urbanization is growing apace, and there is haphazard human movement in the country. The discrepancies in the living standards of urban and rural people are widening, and there is widespread frustration and social dislocation. We must do something immediately to harmonize the progress of various sectors of our economy and to involve the bulk of our working force in the task of economic and social development. We must stop the present underutilization of our rural labor, the present low land and labor productivity prevailing in our rural areas has to be done away with, and our rural folk must be helped to live decently. So one of the things I think is one of our big problems ahead is that we do have Africans, Black people's African people, who are considered elites. And the concern that I have, because of the miseducation, because of the disconnect from our traditional selves, from our ancient African selves, due to slavery, colonialism, et cetera, neocolonialism, all that. One of the things is it's going to be hard to get those so-called elites who have control of military and all. It's going to be hard to get them to give up or to step down from that position. What do you guys propose be done with the elites, the quote-unquote African elites, right? To continue, there are several measures we must adopt to achieve these goals. We must encourage better farming methods to start with. We must promote and finance greater investments in agriculture to achieve more rapid progress. Invest in irrigation, flood control, land reclamation, provision of agricultural machinery and equipment, research, and improving improving communication. The devastating droughts and floods of last year have taught us a lesson, for they hit our poor rural people harder than anyone else. Side by side with the above measures, all efforts must be made to extend vocational training to our agricultural labor force, vocational training. Agricultural cooperatives must be encouraged, and land reforms aiming at increasing efficiency of agriculture to secure social justice and promote economic development must be launched. In doing all this, we must exploit to the full the experience and knowledge already in the hands of our farming communities and augment it with all kinds of agricultural research. Agricultural development alone is not enough. The development of trade and industry must be accorded second highest priority, and the aims of our policy in this respect must be to encourage the establishment and growth of industries which would contribute directly and materially to economic growth, enable our people to participate increasingly in the ownership, direction, and management of our industry and trade. I like that. There are various ways in which we can achieve these aims. Our government should participate directly in the vital industrial undertaking. It should provide funds for training local entrepreneurs and to enable them to participate in industry. Our government should establish a development bank to offer loans to industries and to organize the flow of foreign capital. The government should provide services like research, etc., to industries. Lastly, through fiscal policies, social legislation, and appropriate monetary policies, the government should stimulate private investment while at the same time offering the wage earners and primary producers security of income and employment. Okay. In order that agriculture, industry, and trade may bear fruits, we must have a transport system which coordinates their functions. To begin with, our investment in transport must aim at eliminating wasteful arguments between road transport and railway, etc. Secondly, roads should be realigned in pursuance of a policy of balanced regional development. The educational policy should aim at two targets. I like this part. First, to expand the rate of literacy and deepen the sense of our Kenya and East African citizenship. Second, provide and improve the quality of manpower needed for rapid development. This calls for the expansion of educational facilities at all levels: primary, secondary, technical education, teacher training, and university education. I can't disagree with Mboya in what he's outlining here, particularly on this education part. In the fields of health, we should tackle the problem in various directions. Health education should be promoted. More doctors and nurses should be trained. There should be more collaboration with the other East African countries in the field of research. Of course, more capital will have to be spent on putting up more hospitals and clinics. Each district should have a well-equipped hospital to help reduce overcrowding in the major hospitals. Mobile health teams for the rural areas should be established and so on. I mean, this guy was talking about this back in the 70s, right? This brings us to a section on group responsibilities. I don't know if I lost the folks who were here in the chat, but I hope you guys are still here, and I hope you guys are still enjoying the paper so far. We're almost done. There is no end. So we're in this section called group responsibilities. There is no end to what our government can do. There's no end to what our government can do to promote rapid development. But government alone cannot be entrusted with this heavy task. I like that he came back to this. I have pointed out that in African socialism, the society has an obligation too. In the African society of today and tomorrow, there are several groups of people, for example, intellectuals, businessmen, journalists, cooperatives, trade unions, etc. These groups can and should play their part in the development of the country. I have already outlined elsewhere what I think should be the role of the press and journalists in a developing country like Kenya. I have a few words to say about the other groups. I begin with the intellectuals, right? Akonfo says very constructive information. I appreciate your response there. I begin with the intellectuals. Our intellectuals face a grave challenge. I hope they realize it. I have already pointed out that foreign orientation, Eastern or Western, is artificial. We have a tradition and a human base on which to build a philosophy of life. I have already pointed to the socialist outlook in our tradition. Will the intellectuals pick up the threads and help us defeat intellectual imperialism. The challenge of developing Kenya needs well-trained intellectuals and technicians who are also interested in politics, whatever their professional expertise. It needs shrewd economists and sharp-witted, actively inquiring minds with a sense of responsibility, people who can help us to separate the realities of development from the wild dreams of men in travail, men with practical acumen and a strong devotion to the well-being of our country, which stops short of doctrinationism and fanaticism. Will these be forthcoming? You know, I like that section too. How do you guys feel about his critique, concerns, and hopes for the intellectuals? Is that the same? Is your critiques, hopes, and concerns for the intellectuals amongst us, is it similar? Is it the same? You guys let me know. So now we're going to talk about the businessmen. Now for our businessmen. This group of people are needed to share in the task of development as industrialists and in commerce, both in the rural and urban areas. But will they evolve business ethics suitable to this situation, while at the same time adhering to the standards of efficiency, initiative, and thrift, which will enable them as a group to help Kenya make the maximum use of its resources in the context of economic planning? Will they contribute towards the establishment of industrial democracy? Again, in my mind, these are good aims, but if you're not seriously and actively educating, starting with the youth of today, if you're not doing that right now, you won't see these efforts unfold in the future. Not in a massive way. This is what I think Gassemup was referring to. Right? Gassemup earlier said almost impossible. We have to remove the Western incursions on our social program. You know what I mean? We have to really turn that around. And we got to start with the youth, man. We're gonna have problems from the adults too. So you also gotta try and get the adults on board. But because if you don't, they're gonna be the biggest people fighting against you. If you go back and listen to W.E.B and them talk about the work that they try to do down in Jacksonville with Melanated Conscious Society, the biggest problems they have is with the parents of the kids. The kids they seem to feel like they can get through to, but it's the parents and the grandparents who are highly problematic. Right? So that was the businessman. I can't knock what he's saying about the businessmen. The question is, how do you get to them? Right? The trade unions have a duty too. So we're talking about trade unions next. The wage earner has a vital stake in the whole development of Kenya and the desire of organized workers of Kenya to play a decisive role in the economic development of the country is worthy of encouragement. Workers, as workers know best, where the shoe pinches. Workers, as workers know best, where the shoe pinches. Our trade union should be independent enough and should enjoy freedom of association to defend the interests of the members. But as we are committed to economic planning, our unions must perform their functions while observing certain obligations. In this context, the cooperation of the trade unions should be called for to accelerate the process of capital formation and to lay the foundations of industrial development. The crucial factor is leadership. The crucial factor is leadership. If our unions are led by patriotic, intelligent, and dedicated men who understand the long and short-term economic implications of the policies of the unions, then all will be well. I know that trade union leadership, like political leadership, confers power on the leaders, but in the context of African socialism, all power, must be used for the good of the society. All power for the people. To return to my thesis, I would like to submit that the challenge we face demands one loyalty and a unified approach. In view of this, I would like to remind you of the superiority of traditional African socialism. It gave members of the society a secure and relatively adequate livelihood, and it gave them a full opportunity to share in the making of the conditions upon which their happiness depended. This goes back to what Athrazer said at early on in the show, which is got to be careful with these names that we use. African socialism, I assure you, is a big turnoff to many. But I get the concept that Mboya is trying to put us onto here. I do. Akanfo in the chat says, I agree. We must inform the youth and realize we probably won't see the results. Exactly. Or it could be sooner with dedication. See, that's one of the things with Black Youth African people, man. We don't understand that. And this is where our enemies have in the past understood this, that the work that you're putting in isn't for you to necessarily see it. It'll be great if you can. It'll be great if you can, and the dedication that you would have to put in during your lifetime would have to be something incredible. A lot of the work that we will do really would be the foundation for the future. I am certain in the minds of, say, a Malcolm X or MLK or Garvey, if I had to guess, I would think that at the time of their deaths, that they would think Black Eagles African people would be much further along than they thought. You know what I mean? Because, again, the idea is that you doing this work in this lifetime for people to benefit several lifetimes, maybe even several hundred lifetimes away from yours currently. And we have to get serious about that too. You know, let me just finish off the reading here. Each member of the society was able, by his own and by collective efforts, to produce for himself the means of self-fulfillment. I commend it to you and to our people in our search for means of rationalizing and humanizing our efforts to plan our society for economic and social growth. Let us go abroad and ask for loans and technical skills, not for ideals and ideologies. We must come forward ready to build from our own resources, energy, and sweat the Africa of our own vision and dreams, and not the blueprints of the West or the East. And that's the paper tonight. All right? That is the paper tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys continue to enjoy that reading from when I first asked the question if you were enjoying the paper or not. That's Tom Mboya. All right? That's Tom Mboya. He was a trade union guy himself, educator, Pan-Africanist, author, etc. Right? I always like to read work from Mboya. I mean, there's some problems with Mboya at times, but I generally like his work. And that brother was assassinated too, by the way, right? At a young age too. So even like an Mboya, I imagine he would think that things would be much further ahead than where they are now. I will be back on Thursday. I missed last Thursday. I'll be back on Thursday on the KWAZ Radio YouTube channel, doing one of those shows over there. Make sure you guys subscribe to the KWAZ YouTube channel. Subscribe to all the other shows on YouTube as well. And then, of course, we will be back for Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze. Make sure you guys join the Discord. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. You can drop your, once you join the Discord, I'll give you a role. and you could navigate yourself to the Shoot the Breeze channel on the Discord. You can post up your stories, your prompts with your articles or your videos, and we'll discuss those on Shoot the Breeze. Akanfo has seemingly been working his way through some of the more recent Shoot the Breeze episodes, and for that, I appreciate you. Pro Black Perspective says, good reading. I appreciate that, brother. So I'll see you guys again. Thank you for coming through. Make sure you hit the like button if you didn't already. I'll see you guys on Thursday, and then once again, I'll see you on Saturday. You guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.